I hit the tile hard. Hip first, pride second. The pie slid from my hands mid-fall. Bourbon pecan and 30 years of motherly tradition shattered on their pristine white floor. My son didn't come to help. Cheryl, his wife, just sighed and said, "Maybe next year we'll handle dessert." They didn't see a woman who raised him. They saw liability in slacks. That night, as they laughed over turkey, I dug out the original trust papers and started drafting my revenge in legal terms. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Margot Wallace adjusted the foil tent over the crust and stared at the towering house in front of her. White columns, glossy new shutters, stone path sharp-edged and perfect. It was the kind of place people built when they wanted to erase everything before it. Brian had called it their dream home. Cheryl had called it a new chapter. Neither had asked if Margot planned to be part of the story. The porch lights were already on, even though daylight hadn't fully drained. Margot climbed the front steps slowly, steadying the pie against her chest. Her wrist had been stiff all morning. She blamed the chill. She didn't blame the years. Inside, voices floated from the kitchen, polished, rehearsed, meant to impress. She rang the bell, even though she didn't need to. Cheryl opened the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, you brought the pie." Her tone was a practiced brightness, the kind realtors used when selling a house near train tracks. Margot smiled faintly. "Of course." Bourbon pecan. Like every year she stepped inside, and that's when it happened. Her heel slid before she registered the gloss of the tile. The world tipped. A single thought cut through the stumble. Not the pie. But gravity didn't bargain. Her hip hit the ground with a thud. The pie left her hands mid-fall, smashed into the floor like a dropped memory. Pecans scattered, syrup streaking like amber blood across the pristine grout. Silence. Then a cluck of the tongue. Cheryl stood over her, perfectly still in nude heels. "Oh no, Mom," she said, crouching with theatrical concern, careful not to touch the mess. "Maybe next year we'll just handle dessert." From the hallway, Brian's voice drifted in, lazy and amused. "You okay?" Looked like a cartoon fall. Margot didn't answer right away. Her wrist throbbed, sharp and immediate. She curled her hand beneath her coat sleeve and willed the pain to obey. "I'm fine," she said evenly, pushing herself up. She caught Cheryl's glance, quick, assessing, already measuring how fragile she looked on the floor. Cheryl smiled again, too wide. "Why don't you sit? We'll get you some water." "No need." Margot dusted crumbs from her slacks, careful not to wince. In the kitchen, a second store-bought pie already sat on the marble counter. Pumpkin, untouched, smug in its plastic dome. Brian walked in, kissed Cheryl's cheek. He didn't look at Margot when he said, "Glad you made it. Dinner's in 10. Cheryl really went all out this year. Cheryl beamed, opening the oven to baste a turkey. "Tradition's great," she said without turning. "But sometimes it's nice to upgrade." Margot took a seat at the edge of the breakfast nook, far from the table settings. The chandelier above the dining room table glittered like a necklace meant for someone else. Every wall, every throw pillow, every curated wine rack screamed, "Look how far we've come." She stared at the pie wreckage in the entryway, half cleaned now, but the smell lingered. Bourbon, nuts, brown sugar. Years of holidays, of making it from scratch after work, of cooling it on the windowsill because Brian used to sneak bites from the fridge. Gone in one fall. A fall they laughed at. Cheryl handed her a glass of ice water without looking. "You sure you're okay, Margot? You're not dizzy or anything?" Margot met her eyes. "Not dizzy? Just old, right?" Cheryl's mouth twitched. "I didn't say that." Margot took a slow sip, the cold clashing with the heat rising in her chest. Her wrist ached. Her pride ached more, but behind that ache, something older stirred. Something cold, calculating, legal. Brian sat down, scrolled his phone. "We're thinking about taking a cruise in the spring," he said casually. "Might even rent the house out while we're gone." It's a hot market. Margot didn't respond. She folded her napkin once, then again. Across the room, Cheryl pulled out a printed brochure from her purse and slid it behind the breadbasket. She hadn't meant Margot to see it. Care options for aging parents. Margot looked away slowly, face unreadable. She hadn't turned on any lights. The living room glowed with nothing but firelight and fury. Margot stood with her arms folded as the last page of the brochure blackened and folded inward, the glossy cover folding like a lie, finally swallowing itself. Care options for aging parents. It had been printed on heavyweight stock, of course. Cheryl had good taste and bad intentions. Thick enough to leave an after-smell when it burned. The kind that lingered in your nose, even after you'd opened a window. The first few pages had gone quickly, feeding themselves to the flames like they were ashamed of being read. But Margot had taken her time with the last one. Not because she had doubts, but because she wanted to feel every second of it go. The crackle sharpened, then dimmed. A small hiss, silence. Her phone buzzed. She didn't check it right away. It buzzed again, a third time, then stopped. Margot turned slowly and picked it up off the side table. A text preview lit up the dark screen. Cheryl Wallace. We should talk about next steps. It's time. Margot read it twice, then set the phone face down on the mantel. Not you should rest. Or house. Your wrist? Just, it's time. She moved slowly through the hallway, past the pictures still hung on walls no one visited. Brian's senior photo. Her wedding portrait, 39 years in a frame that had started to fade at the edges. All these images of permanence that now felt like polite lies. At the end of the hall, she knelt by the old metal filing cabinet, beige, scratched, one wheel forever loose, and slid open the bottom drawer, cold metal, the scent of old paper. And tucked near the back, a binder wrapped in a rubber band that had long since cracked from age. Estate planning. Originals. She ran her fingers over the label before pulling it out. Back in the kitchen, she cleared the table with the same kind of precision she'd once used typing court notes. Methodical, no wasted motion. She laid the binder down, flipped it open, and paged through a decade of decisions she'd once believed would protect her from exactly this moment. Wrong, apparently. Wrong about Brian's loyalty. Wrong about Cheryl's intentions. Wrong to ever assume silence was the same as peace. Margot reached for the landline. She still had one, out of habit, and dialed from memory. The line clicked once, then twice. Diane Rourke, her voice, always sharp, never cruel, sounded like courtroom lighting. Cool, neutral, exposing everything. It's Margot. A beat of silence. Something happened. They think I'm weak. Another pause. Then, calm as strategy. Then show them what strength sounds like in court filings. Margot allowed herself one slow breath. I've got the originals. I need them updated. I'll get you a referral. She's good, better than I ever was. Specializes in bloodsuckers. Name? Kim Tiller. Elder law. Probate. Doesn't blink. Margot nodded, already writing the name on a post-it. She didn't say thank you. Diane wouldn't expect it. Before hanging up, Diane added, "Don't play defense." Start the clock. Margot sat back, pen in hand. The room around her was still and quiet, but not peaceful. Peace was gone. What remained was control, and the understanding that if they wanted a power shift, she'd deliver one, just not the kind they planned for. She took her time updating the living trust. Language mattered. Intent mattered more. Health directive too. Names removed, new names inserted. Contingencies lined up like chess pieces. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was cleanup. Legal, clinical, and lethal in all the right ways. The fire in the living room had dimmed to coals, but Margot didn't notice. She was already imagining something colder. A courtroom. It arrived on a Tuesday. No knock, no signature required. Just slid into her mailbox between a community newsletter and a coupon for hearing aids. Margot opened it in the kitchen, coffee half poured, sun just beginning to break through the curtains. She unfolded the letter slowly, as if peeling back something rotten. The first line hit like a slap. Petition for appointment of financial conservator. By the second paragraph, she'd stopped reading aloud. Her hands were steady, but her breath wasn't. She didn't sit. She didn't blink. They had gone there. Claims, forgetfulness, mismanaged funds, increasing instability. Evidence, one fall, a few bank transactions. Conclusion, Margot Wallace may pose a financial risk to herself if not properly supervised. Proposed conservator, Cheryl Wallace, not Brian. Cheryl, of course. She read the fine print twice. The hearing was set for 3 weeks from now. The petition had already been accepted for review. The affidavit was signed, notarized. Margot noted the date on the signature line. The same week she fell, she didn't finish the coffee. Instead, she pulled the Post-it off her fridge, the one with the name Diane had given her, and dialed. Kim Tiller's office. This is Margot Wallace. Diane Rourke referred me. Hold, please. 10 seconds. Then a second voice, clipped and clear. This is Kim. Margot didn't preface. She simply said, they filed a petition to take over my finances. Kim was silent for 3 seconds. Then, tell me everything. Start with the postmark. An hour later, Margot sat across from Kim Tiller in a sleek downtown office that smelled faintly of eucalyptus and toner. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the courthouse. Margot had noticed that on the way in. Proximity mattered. So did perspective. Kim flipped through the petition with gloved hands, marking it up with a fine point pen as she spoke. They're not subtle, Kim said finally, not looking up. That's good. Subtle makes my job harder. Margot raised an eyebrow. You're not concerned? I'm thrilled. Kim glanced at her then, eyes like glass, sharp and unblinking. They just handed me a map of their weak spots. She laid out a legal pad and began a list. Medical records, cognitive evaluations, proof of income, investments, trust structure. I want everything you've got. Margot slid a manila folder across the desk. It's all here, originals and copies. I also brought tax returns, mortgage history, and my banking activity from the last 2 years. Diane said you'd want a clean trail. Kim opened the folder and smiled, almost imperceptibly. You built your defense already. No, Margot said quietly. I built a life. I just never imagined I'd have to defend it. Kim looked at her differently after that, like someone who understood both offense and patience. They worked for another hour quietly. Kim asked precise questions. Margot gave exact answers. Together, they stacked proof like bricks in a wall. Invoices, statements, prescriptions, notarized records. When they paused, Kim leaned back in her chair. You're not unstable. You're a threat. That's why they're panicking. Margot folded her hands in her lap. They always wanted the house. The money came second. They're not getting either, Kim said. But we won't stop at defense. We go on offense. We expose every misstep, every false signature, every conflict of interest. Margot didn't smile. Not yet. But her posture changed. Straighter, calmer. She could feel the bruise on her wrist with every heartbeat. And suddenly, she welcomed the reminder. Kim capped her pen and stood. I'll file our response by Friday. You won't speak to Brian or Cheryl directly. From here on out, everything goes through me. That includes threats, guilt trips, fake apologies, and casseroles. Margot nodded, rising. I don't eat anything from them anymore. Margot stared at the printout. The line item highlighted in yellow. $42,500. Withdrawal from joint certificate of deposit date. 6 weeks ago. Signature. Hers. Except it wasn't. I never touched that account, Margot said, voice low, steady. I opened it in '97 to save for Brian's grad school. It's been untouched since he dropped out. Kim didn't respond right away. She pulled a magnifier strip from her desk drawer and examined the copy again. The notary stamp's real, she muttered. But the letter authorizing the withdrawal? Sloppy, tones wrong, formats dated, and this signature, your W is clean. This one's looped. Margot exhaled slowly, not shock, not even anger, just something deeper, a drop in temperature, like realizing the rot in your house had reached the foundation. Kim leaned back. They forged this. They? Kim didn't blink. Brian doesn't know what a notary does. Cheryl does. Margot nodded once, slowly. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out a worn black binder, and opened to a tab marked Accounts. She slid it toward Kim. Every quarterly statement, every login receipt, every correspondence with the bank. Documented, labeled, time-stamped. Kim gave a small nod of approval. You weren't just saving money. You were saving proof. I didn't know I'd need it, Margot said. But Diane always said to keep the originals, in case the wrong person ever got comfortable. By noon, Kim had submitted a formal request for a transaction freeze and an affidavit to flag the notarized letter as fraudulent. By 3 p.m., Margot was back at home, scanning and printing every document twice. Her dining table looked like a miniature war room, folders fanned out like flankers, receipts like bullets, emails sorted into attack lines. She opened her laptop to Cheryl's Facebook page, public of course. Cheryl liked curated openness. The newest post was from 2 days ago. Hilton Head, y'all. Winter escape, such your manifesting luxury. Cheryl was in a straw hat by a pool, Brian behind her holding a mojito. Margot zoomed in on his watch. Rolex, gold, not his usual. Margot clicked Save Image As, labeling it with the date and location. Then she opened a folder from the back of her file drawer, red, unmarked, secured with a thick rubber band. Inside, notes she'd started keeping months ago. Timeline of manipulation, June. Cheryl accidentally opens Margot's mail. August. Brian insists on helping streamline online banking. September. Duplicate keys go missing after cookout. October. The fall. The pie. The brochure. November. The petition. The withdrawal. The vacation. She scribbled in the margin. Money moved before petition filed. Shows motive. Then another note. Vacation photos equals evidence of benefit from misappropriated funds. The printer whirred again, receipt after receipt spitting out as if the machine, too, had taken a side. Margot took it all and placed it into a fresh binder labeled in her usual black Sharpie. Discovery, Phase 1. The phone rang. Diane. Margot answered with her usual calm. I heard from someone at the clerk's office, Diane said. The CD wasn't listed in their financial disclosures. Because they weren't planning on disclosing it, Margot replied. They were planning on spending it. Silence. Then Diane's voice dropped lower. You're not just fighting for assets now. You're establishing intent. That matters, I know. Intent turns a mistake into a crime. It turns a misunderstanding into exploitation. Margot walked toward her window and looked out at her yard. The leaves were beginning to turn. Orange, gold, red, things dying loudly before the cold set in. They always said I was too methodical, she said. Diane gave a soft chuckle. That's what makes you dangerous. Adult Protective Services sat in a squat brown building with bad lighting and an overworked receptionist. But Margot wasn't there for comfort. I have documentation, she said, without waiting for an invitation. Fraud, financial exploitation, forged documents. I want a case open today. The woman blinked, startled but intrigued. Let me get an investigator. 15 minutes later, Margot sat across from a caseworker in a beige-walled office, lit by flickering fluorescents. She slid the binder across the table. Timeline of manipulation, she said, tapping the cover. Bank statements, notarized forgeries, photo evidence, digital trail. The money's already gone, but the intent is traceable. The investigator, a woman in her early 40s with crow's feet and a notepad full of pressure points, opened it and began flipping. This is comprehensive. It's accurate. The woman looked up. And you're saying your son and his wife orchestrated all of this? I'm not saying it. I'm proving it. 10 minutes later, the investigator walked the binder down the hall and returned with her supervisor. An hour after that, Margot left the building with two things: a case number, a promise that APS would fast-track a full financial exploitation report, Brian and Cheryl named directly. By the time Margot reached her car, she wasn't angry anymore. She was focused. Kim's email came through just before dinner. I filed the motion to freeze any and all joint financial activity, requesting expedited review. A PS report should strengthen our position. No contact with them until the judge weighs in. Margot read it twice, then forwarded the entire thing, without comment, to Diane. She spent the rest of the evening organizing her next binder. Black Sharpie again. Strategic Escalation, Phase 2. Then came the knock. It was loud, rushed, familiar. Margot opened the door just enough to see Brian standing on the porch, hands in his coat pockets, his smile weak and sweaty. Hey, I was driving by. Thought I'd check on you. Margot didn't step aside. Brian looked thinner, or maybe just smaller. I heard you've been talking to lawyers, filing things, getting APS involved. His voice dropped into faux concerned softness. Mom, come on, this doesn't need to get ugly. She tilted her head. It's already ugly, Brian. You just didn't think I'd notice. He swallowed. We can fix this. Maybe you're confused about how the account got touched. I didn't mean. Margot cut him off with the calm precision of a scalpel. You forged my name. You submitted a letter I never wrote. And you took money set aside for your education and spent it on a vacation with a woman who told me to stop baking pies. Brian flinched, like she'd slapped him. Mom, it's not. Cheryl said we were just. Look, I panicked, okay? I thought we'd pay it back before you noticed. Noticed? She repeated, quiet. You thought I'd be dead before it mattered. Brian's face hardened. You're making this worse than it has to be. Cheryl's already upset. Maybe we all just say some things we don't mean sometimes. Margot stepped forward just enough for the porch light to catch her eyes. No, Brian. You say things you don't mean. I write things into court motions. She closed the door, locked it, and didn't move until she heard his car back out of the driveway, too fast, tires biting gravel. 10 minutes later, her phone buzzed. Text from Cheryl. Let's stop all this nonsense. We're still family. Margot stared at it, then typed, not anymore, and hit send. She'd worn navy, clean lines, soft wool, not a single wrinkle. Her hair was pinned in a perfect chignon, lipstick exactly the shade of restrained defiance. When the bailiff called her name, Margot didn't flinch. She rose with a calm that unsettled even the clerk. Kim walked beside her, motion folders under one arm, calm and unreadable behind her silver glasses. Together, they looked like two women on their way to close escrow, not confront betrayal. Courtroom 3B smelled of worn wood and cold air. Fluorescents buzzed faintly overhead. The benches were half full, some families, a few reporters, and toward the back, a figure Margot recognized immediately. Diane. She didn't wave, neither did Margot. But their eyes met for a brief second, and that was enough. Brian sat at the defense table in a suit that didn't quite fit, tie slightly off-center. He wouldn't look at her directly. Cheryl sat beside him, stiffer than usual. Her makeup heavier than normal, more war paint than polish. She didn't smile. Margot took her seat beside Kim. The judge entered. All rise. Once they were seated again, Brian's attorney, a man who looked like he specialized in golf, not litigation, stood and buttoned his blazer. Your Honor, we understand Ms. Wallace's wishes to remain independent. However, this case is about protecting her from herself. She recently fell, as documented, and has displayed signs of confusion regarding her finances. We are not here to punish. We're here to intervene compassionately. Kim didn't move, not yet. Brian's lawyer gestured toward Cheryl, seated quietly with folded hands. Miss. Cheryl Wallace has offered to step in as financial conservator, not out of greed, but care. She is concerned for Miss Wallace's well-being and wishes to ensure her assets are managed responsibly. Cheryl nodded slightly, almost rehearsed. Kim stood. Permission to approach the bench with exhibits? Granted. She handed the clerk a thick folder, then turned to the courtroom. My client is neither confused nor careless. What she is, unfortunately, is betrayed. Kim flipped open the top document. Here are medical records confirming cognitive stability and physical fitness from her primary care physician and 2 specialists. Also included are certified copies of forged financial documents submitted to the bank to access over $42,000 of her savings. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Brian shifted in his seat. Kim continued, controlled and clipped. We have notarized statements from bank officials, a forensic handwriting expert's report confirming the signature forgery, and transaction logs, showing unauthorized transfers to an account controlled by Mr. and Mrs. Wallace. She turned to Cheryl. And we have an online purchase receipt for $9,000, used to stock inventory for Cheryl Wallace's boutique, coinciding precisely with the missing funds. The judge turned. Miss Wallace, do you deny this? Cheryl's voice cracked. I don't manage all our finances. I didn't personally. Brian handles some of it. Kim cut in. The payment was processed through a business account registered in your name only. Silence. The judge raised an eyebrow. Where's the inventory now? Cheryl looked down. Sold. Most of it. Kim returned to her seat. The judge turned toward Margot. Would you like to speak, ma'am? Margot stood. Walked slowly to the witness stand. Every eye followed her. She was sworn in, took her seat. Then, without notes, without hesitation, she spoke. I didn't forget anything, she said. Not my accounts, not my legal rights, and certainly not the way my daughter-in-law looked at me after I fell and said, maybe next year we'll just handle dessert. She let it hang, the silence, the memory. What I forgot, she continued, was that family isn't what you're born into. It's who shows up when no one's watching, and who waits until you're on the floor to start circling the inheritance. A rustle from the gallery. Margot looked directly at Brian. You stole from someone who spent her whole life making sure you never had to ask. Then at Cheryl. And you used that money to start a boutique in the middle of a crime. The judge cleared his throat. That's enough for now. Thank you, Miss Wallace. She stepped down, calm, measured. As she passed Kim, she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. From the gallery, Diane gave a single, quiet nod. The report came bound in a heavy blue cover, corners sharp, logo embossed. Margot set it down on her kitchen table like it was radioactive. Wallace Family Trust, Forensic Financial Review. Prepared by Joanna Frey, CPA, CFE. Margot didn't need to read every page. Kim already had. But she still turned through each one, slow and deliberate, like unwrapping a truth she already knew. $9,000 to Cheryl's boutique wholesale supplier, listed under caregiving reimbursements. $3,750 transferred to a Venmo account labeled B. Wallace HH, days before the Hilton Head trip. $1,400 spent at a luxury skincare company. $650 in meals at 3 restaurants, none in her town. None during visits, each one justified, categorized, sanitized. Until you lined them up. Then they told the story. You were our bank, and we assumed you'd never balance the books. Kim arrived just after noon. She didn't bring flowers. She brought court documents. I filed a civil fraud claim, she said, setting down the envelope. This runs parallel to the conservatorship defense. 2 tracks. One leads to dismissal, the other leads to damages. Margot didn't look up from the audit. What's the real number? Kim flipped open the folder and pointed to a column. Misused or misappropriated. $58,420, give or take, not counting penalties. Margot closed the report, eyes steady. Let's take the give out of it. That afternoon, she drove to the locksmith. New deadbolts, Reinforced latches. Digital code on the garage. By 4 o'clock, Brian's key no longer worked. By 5 o'clock, neither did Cheryl's. Margot walked through the house afterward with a slow, practiced eye. She wasn't looking for sentimental items. She was looking for vulnerabilities. Anything left unlocked. Anything they could twist. In her study, she opened the fireproof safe, took out the original power of attorney form she'd signed 6 years ago, and tore it in two. The act wasn't symbolic. It was procedural. She filed the revocation with Kim that evening. At 6:42 p.m., the voicemail came in. Brian. His voice had that brittle, artificial calm, the kind someone uses when they know they're being recorded but haven't quite accepted the stakes. Mom, I don't know what Cheryl said or what the court told you, but you're blowing this out of proportion. You're making a scene. You're embarrassing us. He paused, then added, People are starting to talk. This doesn't look good. For anyone, Margot replayed the message once, then twice. Then she copied the audio into a labeled folder on her desktop. Voicemails, intimidation. The next day, a letter arrived from the boutique's new mailing address, a P.O. box in a strip mall. Inside was a flyer for a holiday sale pop-up. Cheryl's face smiled from the corner. Standing beside a rack of handbags Margot recognized. She'd paid for half of them, apparently. She added it to the fraud binder under a new tab. Evidence of profit, misused funds. That night, Diane called. You saw the audit? I read it twice. You still standing? Margot chuckled faintly. I haven't sat since Tuesday. Diane paused. You're not just winning this case. You're documenting their downfall in real time. They wanted me to disappear quietly. Well, you always did have a flair for paperwork. Margot allowed herself a smile. Then, after a long pause, she said, I think they believed the fall meant I was fragile. What they never understood is, I know how to land. Subject. Early listing inquiry. 74 Merriweather Lane. From denise.t@allpointsrealty.com to brian.wallace79@gmail.com. Hi, Brian, per your voicemail. We've marked the property as pending transfer, per your earlier intent to vacate letter. Once we receive the signed walkthrough clearance, we can begin showing the house next week. Margot didn't blink. She scrolled down, attached, a scanned PDF labeled Wallace_intent to vacate.pdf header. Margot Wallace, authorizing party. Her name, her signature, her address, except she'd never written that letter, never signed that form, never called any realtor. And the email was dated 2 weeks ago, 3 days after Cheryl's "Let's stop this nonsense" text. The betrayal was no longer coded or subtle, it was documented. She downloaded the PDF, cross-checked the signature against the previous forgery from the CD withdrawal. Same loops, same digital timestamp artifacts. Cheryl had gotten bolder and sloppier. Margot picked up the phone. Kim, we have a new problem. The next morning, Kim met her outside the county clerk's office. You're filing for an emergency restraining order, Kim said, already walking her through the form. Not against them as people, yet, but against any and all real estate activity involving your property. Listings, showings, communications, contracts. I want full control reestablished, Margot said flatly. You'll have it. The hearing was short. Real estate fraud doesn't play well with judges. Kim submitted the forged letter. The phony email thread. A public record search showing Brian had recently used the address on a mortgage pre-qualification form for a second property. Margot sat stone-faced as the judge read through it. He looked up over his glasses. Do you know how hard it is to list a home you don't own? Kim answered for her. Apparently not hard enough. The judge ruled in Margot's favor. Emergency restraining order granted. Exclusive legal control of the property granted. Violation would now be considered criminal interference with estate property. By afternoon, the realty page had been taken down. The pending transfer tag vanished from search results. Margot stood in her front yard, holding a laminated sheet and a staple gun, She wore gloves. Not for warmth, just precision. She walked up to her front door, lined the sheet to eye level, and drove the first staple into the wood with more satisfaction than she'd ever expected from office supplies. Notice to public. This property is not for sale. No listings, no tours, legal action pending. All inquiries will be forwarded to legal counsel. She stepped back and read it once, then twice. Let them see it. Let the neighbors see it. Let the mail carrier take a picture. Inside, the doorbell rang. Diane stood there with 2 coffees. "You beat me to it," she said, handing one over. Margot gestured to the sign. "I like clarity." Diane took a slow sip. "That house is more than bricks, Margot. It's a line they shouldn't have crossed, I know. They thought if they moved fast enough, you wouldn't notice." Margot nodded. "They still don't understand who they're dealing with." Diane smiled, sharp and proud. "No, they don't. But they will. There was no bailiff this time. No need." The gallery was full but quiet, just rustling coats and the dull hum of anticipation. Even the clerk's typing sounded cautious. Margot sat at the plaintiff's table with Kim, her binder resting in her lap like a shield. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already filed, time-stamped, and recorded. Cheryl was already seated at the defense table, wearing charcoal gray and a face 2 shades too pale for her makeup. Brian sat beside her, arms folded, tapping a foot that kept giving him away. The judge entered. "All rise." Everyone did slowly. Then came the call. Final hearing on Wallace versus Wallace, conservatorship petition, and civil claim for financial misappropriation. Margot didn't look at Brian. She didn't need to. He wasn't here to win. He was here to survive. Kim stood first. "Your Honor, over the last 8 weeks, we've submitted evidence that demonstrates not only undue manipulation of Ms. Wallace's estate, but active, ongoing fraud executed through forged signatures, falsified notarizations, and unauthorized asset transfers. Today, we present the full chain." She gestured to the screen behind her. Slide 1, the forged intent to vacate letter. Slide 2, the CD withdrawal authorization with falsified signature. Slide 3, transaction log connecting boutique inventory purchases to Margot's savings account. Slide 4, side-by-side signature analysis. Margot's verified handwriting versus Cheryl's alterations. Brian's lawyer objected. "Your Honor, this is excessive. We've already acknowledged some procedural missteps." "Not missteps," Kim said flatly. "Decisions." Coordinated and repeated. The judge waved off the objection. Kim clicked to the next slide. "Finally, we have social media evidence placing the defendants on vacation the same week of the withdrawal, financed by stolen funds, confirmed by both the audit and Venmo trail." The room was silent, except for the quiet churn of the projector. The judge turned to Cheryl. "Miss Wallace, would you like to respond?" Cheryl rose slowly, hands gripping the table. "With respect, Your Honor, I didn't know. I didn't write the letters. I didn't handle the money. That was Brian. He said it was all legal." Brian's head snapped toward her. "You signed the boutique orders," Kim said, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "You opened the business account with the withdrawn funds. You posted from Hilton Head." "I thought," Cheryl stammered, "I thought the money was a gift." Kim stepped forward. "And if it was, why forge her name?" Cheryl froze. The judge's voice was calm but sharp. "Sit down, miss." Wallace Bryan stood up suddenly. "It was Cheryl's idea. The house, the letter, all of it. She said we needed a plan, that my mother was slipping." "Mr. Wallace." The judge's tone turned cold. "Enough." Bryan sank back down. The room pulsed with silence. Then the gavel came down. Once. This court finds no legal basis for the conservatorship petition. It is denied, with prejudice. Full control of financial and personal decision-making remains with Ms. Margot Wallace. Another gavel strike. In addition, the court finds sufficient evidence to support the claim of civil fraud. Assets are to be returned in full, with applicable interest. Court costs and legal fees are to be paid by the defendants. Financial sanctions will follow pending restitution review. Margot felt the breath release from her chest. Not a gasp, not relief. Something quieter. A shift back into the center of her own life. Kim gave her a glance that said more than a smile could. As the judge dismissed the room, Cheryl was already turning her face away from reporters. Brian didn't move, just stared ahead, blank and cornered. Outside, Margot walked down the courthouse steps with Kim. Diane waited at the bottom, holding a folded newspaper. "Front page tomorrow," she said, handing it over. The headline was already printed. "Local woman wins, court fight against family fraud." Margot took the paper, let them read it over breakfast. The estate planner's office was quiet, modern, and sterile. Glass walls, minimalist decor, an untouched candy bowl. Margot sat across from a young woman named Leah Crane, who didn't flinch when Margot handed over a stack of documents and said plainly, "I'm removing 2 names." "Brian and Cheryl Wallace?" Leah asked, confirming with a gentle glance. "Correct." Margot sipped her tea. "I want them erased completely. No fallback provisions, no loopholes. If I die tomorrow, they don't get a salt shaker." Leah nodded and opened a clean template on her tablet. "We'll also update your trust structure. Any charitable designations?" Margot smiled faintly. "Yes, the Kentucky Center for Elder Legal Defense. I'd like to seed a new endowment, $75,000 to start. And what should we call the trust?" Margot looked out the window, then back. "The Wallace Fund." Leah hesitated. "Are you sure you want it named after the same family you're—" Margot cut in. "They don't own the name. I do." That same day, Cheryl's boutique page, still public, still performatively curated, erupted in the worst way possible, organically. Dozens of comments under a new product photo. "Stealing from your Emiel to fund fake vegan handbags?" "Real classy. We don't buy from abusers, thanks." "Court transcripts public now, sweetie." Google's free. By noon, the post had been deleted. By 2 o'clock, the entire boutique account was marked private. Margot printed screenshots anyway, just in case. The ripple reached Brian too, through quieter corporate channels. A week later, Diane called with an update. "I heard from an old clerk. Her sister works at the same firm as your son. Margot didn't react. He's not fired, but they've reassigned him to internal projects. Desk near the copy machine. Title scrubbed from the website." You know the drill. Margot exhaled once through her nose. Not satisfaction, just data. "I didn't ask for that," she said. "No," Diane agreed. "But the universe is thorough." Later that month, Margot stood in front of a classroom at Jefferson County Community Law Center. It smelled like whiteboard markers and optimism, something she hadn't trusted in a long time. 10 young women sat in folding chairs, notebooks open, half of them not yet sure what kind of law they wanted to practice, all of them watching her. She held up a single sheet of paper. "This is a statutory power of attorney form. It's boring, it's dry, and it's the most dangerous thing you can hand to the wrong person." Someone in the back chuckled. "I'm serious," Margot said. "It's more dangerous than any gun if misused. And it's the first thing predators, yes, even family, go for when someone's over 65. She passed around copies. "Understand this form. Learn how to break it down, protect someone with it, and never, ever hand it over without a fight." A young woman in the front raised her hand. "How did you learn all this?" Margot smiled. "The hard way." Afterwards, Diane met her at the diner 2 blocks down. "You're glowing," she said, sliding into the booth. Like someone who just reminded the world she's not done yet. "They asked me to come back next month. Teach another session." Diane nodded. "I hope you do." Margot stirred her tea. "I've spent most of my life trying to preserve what I had. Now I think I want to build something new." Diane raised her mug. "Now that's what I call an amended legacy." They clinked glasses, tea and coffee, no champagne. Margot preferred it that way. No bubbles, no illusion, just heat and truth. Local senior exposes family fraud in courtroom victory. The headline stretched across the fold of the Courier Weekly, bold and unforgiving. A photo of Margot, arms crossed, eyes level with the lens, sat above the subheader, "Retired court secretary uses paper trail to dismantle fraudulent conservatorship claim." She hadn't posed for it. It was taken as she left the courthouse, walking beside Kim and Diane, sunlight catching in her hair like a quiet crown. The story spread fast. Local talk radio picked it up within hours. By dinner, the digital version had been shared more than 12,000 times. Most of the comments weren't just sympathetic. They were furious. "My brother tried to do this to my mom. She didn't fight. I wish she had. We need more Margots and fewer Brians, finally." Someone showed their receipts and won. Margot didn't go looking for fallout. It came to her anyway. First, Cheryl's name disappeared from the Charity Gala's Facebook page. Then the Ladies Who Launch Entrepreneur Brunch replaced her headshot with a bland placeholder and a caption that read, "TBD, speaker reschedule." By Thursday, Cheryl's face was removed entirely from the West End Women's Civic Foundation website. A single administrator quietly edited her bio page and deleted the events chair title from the site's backend. Margot didn't celebrate. She made note of it, then moved on. Diane appeared on local morning news 3 days later. Clean blazer, calm tone. Margot Wallace never lost her sharpness, she told the host. She just stopped using it. For years she thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping her dignity. But when she finally moved, she moved like a freight train. The host asked if Margot had help. She had her documents, Diane said, smiling. That was all the help she needed. The next week, Margot's inbox exploded. Emails, messages, voicemails. Over 200 seniors, most from Kentucky, some from as far as Ohio and West Virginia. "My son just asked me to put him on my deed. Should I? My niece offered to help with my online banking, and now I can't log in. They're saying I'm forgetful. I'm not. Can you help?" She tried to respond to each one personally. For the first 73, she did. Then she realized something bigger was needed. 2 Saturdays later, the small community center classroom, usually reserved for knitting groups and budget planning workshops, was full before 9:15 a.m. A hand-lettered poster on the door read, "Know Your Rights at 70+, a free legal awareness seminar with Margot Wallace." She stood at the front with a whiteboard marker in one hand and a file folder in the other. "This," she said, holding up a standard form, power of attorney, "is what they will ask you to sign before the trouble starts." Laughter from the back. "But this," she continued, flipping to a laminated flowchart Kim had helped her design, "is what you ask them before you do." She walked them through financial red flags, then housing, then digital control. When she opened the floor for questions, every hand went up. Afterward, as she packed up her papers and erased the board, Kim appeared in the doorway with a coffee in each hand. "You know," she said, passing one over, "if you're going to start a revolution, it should probably have a logo." Margot smiled. "You think this is a revolution?" "It's starting to look like one," Margot sipped. "I never wanted to be anyone's symbol." "Well," Kim said, "you are. Deal with it." They stood in silence, watching the room empty out. Then Kim added, "We should partner on this." Margot turned to her. "A legal clinic?" Kim shook her head. "Bigger, mobile workshops, clinics in underserved towns, pull in younger attorneys, rotate in seasoned voices. You teach, I litigate. They listen." Margot considered it. Slowly, carefully. "Let's draft a charter next week." Margot found the link by accident, posted in a neighborhood Facebook group beneath a lost dog flyer and a heated debate about recycling bins. Help Cheryl and Brian Wallace rebuild after unfair legal drama. Written in all lowercase, like a quiet whimper, she clicked, just once. The photo at the top was a soft focus shot of Cheryl in beige cashmere, seated in their old living room, the same one where Margot had fallen with the pie. Brian stood behind her, hands resting on the back of her chair. The caption beneath read, "We're just trying to move forward, one honest step at a time." Margot scrolled. The description was vague and careful. After a long and deeply personal legal misunderstanding, we find ourselves financially drained and starting over. Any help is appreciated during this difficult transition. This isn't just about us. It's about second chances. Below it, goal $25,000, raised $137. Top comment, you mean the misunderstanding where you stole $50,000 from your mom? Another, y'all should have started over before you forged documents. And maybe next year you can handle the dessert. Margot stared at the screen for a moment, then clicked the tab closed without a word. She didn't bookmark it. She didn't send it to Kim. She didn't need to. The world had already done its work. 2 weeks later, Kim walked into her kitchen with a red folder and a receipt stamped, "Finalized." "Restitution's done," she said. The court clawed back $18,000 from the boutique account and a partial lien on their tax return. She slid the folder across the table. "It's yours now." Margot opened it. $18,000. Clean, traceable, legal. "Use it for whatever you want," Kim said. "Seed funding, furnace repair, bourbon and silence." Margot smiled. "I've already got bourbon and silence." They both laughed, too briefly but fully. Kim took a sip of coffee. "Last I heard, they moved into a 2-bedroom rental off Briar Hill. No yard, no home office. Cheryl tried to file an LLC update. Denied. Brian's using a Gmail address now. His firm scrubbed their server clean." "And the house?" Margot asked. "Foreclosure. Auction set for next quarter." Margot closed the folder. "Cold?" Kim asked. "No," Margot said, setting the file aside. "Just finished." Later that afternoon, Diane stopped by. She didn't knock, just let herself in like old times and sat at the kitchen table with 2 peaches and a bottle of mineral water. "I brought something for your altar of quiet satisfaction," she said, sliding a small note card across the table. On the front, a printed quote from the Courier op-ed. "Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, 'Not this time.'" Margot chuckled. "You printed it." It deserved cardstock. They ate their peaches over the sink like high school rebels, sticky, sweet, full of history. "You didn't just win," Diane said, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. "You taught them something no one else could." Margot leaned back, thoughtful. "I didn't do it to teach." "I know. But if they learned something?" Diane raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Margot's voice was soft, but final. "Silence is expensive." Courtroom 4B was full, but there was an empty chair at the front row of the plaintiff's gallery, marked reserved for Miss Wallace. It stayed empty. Kim sat alone at the plaintiff's table, organized as ever, blazer crisp, hair swept back in a low bun that said, "I came here to finish this." She didn't glance at Brian. She didn't need to. The trial moved fast. Kim had seen to that. Cheryl took the stand second. Her hands trembled as she lifted her right one to be sworn in. For the first 10 minutes, she stuck to the script. Stress, confusion, miscommunication. The same curated ambiguity that had worked at social brunches and boutique launches. But then Kim pulled out the envelope. It was the original forged intent to vacate letter, blown up on a projector for the room to see. A handwriting expert's certified opinion sat in the court file. So did the notary's denial affidavit, and the dated metadata that linked it to Cheryl's home IP address. "You submitted this letter, yes?" Kim asked. I'm not sure I remember." "It was attached to a real estate listing your husband confirmed by phone. Are you saying you didn't know?" Cheryl faltered. "Brian told me it was just precautionary. Is this your handwriting?" Silence. "Miss Wallace," the judge said. "Answer the question." Cheryl looked down at her lap, then up, eyes watery, shoulders sagging. Yes. A pause. Yes, she repeated, louder. I forged it. I didn't think she'd fight back. I didn't think. She stopped herself. The silence was cavernous. From the defense table, Brian muttered something under his breath, loud enough that the bailiff raised a brow. 5 minutes later, Kim presented a short stack of banking logs, Cheryl's name on every purchase, her email on the boutique supplier forms, her initials on every one of the reimbursement filings. Brian stood up. She was the one pushing this. I just signed what she gave me. I thought it was legal assistance, not fraud. You people act like I wrote these things. Sit down, Mr. Wallace, the judge said sharply. Brian took a step back, jaw tight. I said sit down. He didn't. The bailiff took 2 steps forward. Mr. Wallace, you are on the verge of contempt. Brian sat, hard. Outside the courthouse, a light rain had started, soft and steady. Inside, the judge delivered the final ruling. The court finds Cheryl and Brian Wallace guilty of financial elder abuse under Kentucky Revised Statute 209.990. Due to mitigating cooperation by the defendant Cheryl Wallace during today's proceedings, sentencing will be deferred. However, he paused to let the words land. Both parties are hereby ordered to complete a mandatory series of community restitution classes and financial ethics training, effective immediately. Restitution is reaffirmed. Public apology will be part of sentencing. The gavel dropped. It didn't echo, but the silence afterward did. Kim closed her folder with one clean motion and stood. There were no reporters this time, no cameras, just the weight of a courtroom heavy with consequence. She left the reserved seat untouched. Across town, Margot poured coffee into 6 ceramic mugs and set them on the patio table behind her house. The air smelled like fresh rain and warm bourbon pecan pie. Her Saturday brunch guests included Diane, 2 of the law clinic mentees, and her neighbor Carol, who dropped off the casserole weeks earlier with a wink. There were no speeches, just quiche, fruit salad, and one perfectly baked pie cooling on the sill behind them, its crust golden and unapologetically bold. Verdict come through yet? Diane asked, spooning jam onto toast. Margot nodded. Guilty, deferred sentencing, community restitution. Diane smirked. Fitting. Margot didn't look smug. She looked steady. I wanted a clean ending, she said, but a slow one works too. The envelope arrived in late September, unmarked but unmistakable, Cheryl's cursive looping across the front like she thought familiarity was still a currency. Margot turned it over once, then again, no return address, but the postmark was from Shelbyville. Inside, she imagined the contents before confirming them. A half-hearted apology wrapped in passive voice. Things got out of hand. We were overwhelmed. Please forgive us. She didn't open it. Didn't need to. Instead, she slid the envelope into her filing cabinet under a new tab in the back of her fraud archive. Unopened attempts. Post-verdict contact. Then she made tea. Chamomile. 2 sugars. Not because she was tired, because she'd earned the quiet. Later that afternoon, Diane came by with a bag of apples and a bottle of white wine. Neither of them liked but always drank anyway. I brought harvest season, she announced. Margot waved her in. Good. You'll need it. They sat by the kitchen window as leaves twisted from green to gold. Anything new? Diane asked, glancing at the tidy stack of court notices and mail on the counter. Margot reached for the unopened envelope and held it up between 2 fingers. Cheryl. Wrote me. Diane raised an eyebrow. And Margot dropped it back on the pile. It's filed. Diane grinned. That's power, you know. Not answering. I'm not angry anymore, Margot said. I'm resolved. Is that a paralegal way of saying done? It's a Margot way of saying it. 2 days later, she stood at the post office with her own envelope. White, plain, deliberate. Inside it, a single page. The original forged consent letter, the one with her name looped wrong. The one that started everything. No note, no commentary, just the truth. laminated and sent back like evidence returned to the scene of a failed heist. She addressed it to Brian, nothing more. As she slid it into the outgoing mail slot, she didn't smile, but her mouth settled into something that felt like completion. Kim stopped by that evening, fresh off a deposition, heels still on. "I heard," she said, letting herself in. "Unopened letter. Archived and iced. I don't play fetch," Margot said. Kim laughed, dropping her bag on the counter. "And mailing Brian his own forged paperwork? That's cold. It's accurate," Margot said. "And poetic." Kim poured herself a glass of water. "You always did have a paralegal's touch for irony." Margot looked up from the pie crust she was pinching into place. "I just wanted to bake a pie. Instead, they wanted to cut me out." Kim leaned against the counter, watching her work. "And now?" Margot pressed the edges of the dough with a fork. Clean, symmetrical, final. "Now I'm the one holding the recipe." Outside, the sky shifted into early dusk, the kind that painted her windows amber and made every surface look kinder. Margot placed the pie into the oven and set the timer. Apple this time, no bourbon, just cinnamon and clarity. Behind her, Diane was flipping through a magazine and Kim had found the record player. Old jazz filling the room like soft armor. Margot stood there for a moment, hands on the counter, breathing in the scent of sugar and spice and ownership. Some stories end in courtrooms, some in whispered apologies. But this one would end with a slice of pie, and a door that didn't open when regret came knocking. The final hearing was short, not rushed, just inevitable. Everything that needed to be said had already been filed. Now came the part where words turned into weight. Margot arrived through the side entrance, flanked by Diane and Kim. No media this time. Just the quiet, watchful presence of a courtroom that had seen too many betrayals and too few consequences. Courtroom 2C was smaller than the others. Fewer pews, a closer bench. A room built for reckoning, not performance. Brian sat at the defense table, shoulders hunched, suit too worn at the cuffs. Cheryl was beside him, palms pressed together like prayer might still work as evidence. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. He didn't preamble. "This court has reviewed the plea agreements and sentencing recommendations filed last week. We'll begin with Cheryl Wallace." Cheryl stood. She looked tired in a way that no amount of makeup could fix. Her voice was quiet, rehearsed, still clinging to a narrative that had long since unraveled. "I didn't know how far it would go," she said, eyes down. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I wanted to help manage things before they got worse. We were scared. Things got away from us. Kim didn't flinch. Margot didn't blink." The judge leaned forward, unmoved. "You were not afraid. You were entitled, and you didn't help manage anything. You forged documents to take control of assets that weren't yours. Fear is not a defense when it comes with receipts." He turned. Mr. Wallace Bryan rose. He didn't look at anyone. "We thought we were helping," he mumbled. "She fell. She forgot things. She needed structure." The judge didn't even look at his notes. "She didn't forget anything. You did. You forgot that aging isn't incompetence. You forgot that control isn't love. And you forgot that signatures don't appear out of thin air." Silence rolled across the room. The judge picked up the ruling. His voice was measured, precise. "This court hereby sentences Cheryl and Brian Wallace to 12 months probation, 100 hours of community restitution work with elder support organizations, and mandatory attendance in financial ethics training and family systems therapy. All previously ordered financial restitution and attorney fees remain in place. Public apology must be submitted in writing and will be published through the county's legal notice registry." He looked up. "Let the record show, exploitation under the guise of care is still exploitation. And sometimes, silence isn't just cruelty, it's strategy, but not here, not this time." The gavel came down, final, like a locked vault. Outside, the air was cool and clean. Margot stepped into it like someone exiting a long, smoke-filled room. She didn't look back, didn't need to. Kim walked beside her, silent but steady. Diane was just behind, holding Margot's coat like a loyal shadow. There were no interviews, no cameras, just the sound of court doors closing behind them. At the edge of the courthouse steps, Margot paused. She looked up at the flag, then down at her shoes. Solid, grounded, exactly where she meant to be. Diane touched her elbow gently. "You okay?" Margot nodded. "They'll serve their time in shame." "That's enough." Kim pulled the car keys from her bag. "Where to now?" "Home," Margot said. "I have a new crust recipe I want to try." They smiled. That night, at the small round table by the window, Margot lit a single candle, plated a slice of apple pie, and poured a short glass of bourbon. She sat across from no one, because she wasn't waiting for apology or regret. She'd already won. The paper lay open beside her on the table, legal notice section circled. Public apology submitted, language vetted, tone carefully bland. Margot didn't read it. She had her own version. And as she looked out the window, the last words she'd written in her journal earlier that day echoed in her mind. Clean and unshakable. They laughed when I fell carrying the pie, so I made sure they fell harder in court.